He was a soldier's soldier, able to speak very, very plainly, no matter what rank he was addressing. So you've just been touching on his distinguished service career, not just in Kosovo, where he absolutely said, I'm not going to trigger World War III, but also in Northern Ireland during the very difficult times there. And he was in charge of the British Army when the Iraq War started in 2003.
Good morning to you. The story you're reading most in the Times this morning is the obituary of General Mike Jackson, who has died at the age of 80. The Times remembers him as the British general who argued with his superior officer during the war in Kosovo in 1999. He refused to take on Russian forces at an airport there. "I won't start World War III for you," he told the American General Wesley Clark. Instead, Jackson diffused a potentially explosive situation by sitting down with his Russian counterpart over whiskey and vodka. Someone who knew Mike Jackson well is Tobias Ellwood, former Conservative MP, former chair of the Defence Select Committee, who served under him and had lunch with him in the Commons only a few months ago. We can speak to Tobias now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
He was such a recognisable figure to really anyone who followed the news from the 90s onwards. There was a charisma about him, wasn't there?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the British Army has lost one of its giants. I mean, he was a soldier's soldier, able to speak very, very plainly, no matter what rank he was addressing. So full of energy, charisma, and indeed a very, very sharp wit, indeed, and tough as old boots. You've just been touching on his distinguished service career, not just in Kosovo, where he absolutely said, I'm not going to trigger World War III, but also in Northern Ireland during the very difficult times there. And he was in charge of the British Army when the Iraq War started in 2003. But he was a fantastic communicator. I remember the first time I met him was not when I was in the army yet. I was in the University Officer Training Corps, about to do something called the Cambrian March, which is the biggest endurance test, 72 hours without sleep, or doing a series of tasks across the Brecon Beacons. And we were dreading it. Everybody in this big hangar, in walks Brigadier Jackson is then what? And boy, did he fire us up. His determination, his grit, his tenacity was everything that you'd expect from a British Army officer, but also with a fierce intellect as well, who certainly will be sorely missed.
Is that it strikes me as someone, when we read stories about World War I, World War II, going back into British history there's a kind of type of austere, kind of brilliant, charming, clever, strong, gritty figures who've been senior in the army. Is he part of a tradition, do you think?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the difference between perhaps the army, the armed forces, and politics is that you can only get to the top if you pass a series of tests along the way, whether it be Sandhurst, whether it be Junior Staff College, Stroven, and so on. So you have to have that intellectual stamina, if you like, but of course that leadership capability as well. I had assumed that there would be the similar sort of progress that you'd see in politics as well, but alas, that's not the case. I did ask him whether he ever thought of standing in politics. I've raised it the last time, that lunch you mentioned as well. And his reply was very blunt indeed, and I think many can relate to it. He said, I couldn't stand the blue on blue, because one thing you find in the British Army is loyalty. And if people don't like what you say, they say it to your face. Politics is a little bit different.
Politics is very different to that. To us. What did he make of? You had lunch with him recently. What else did you talk about? What did he make of? Was he concerned about the parlous state of the British Army? Did he have views on Ukraine? Because he became slightly prickly as he got older. Is that fair? He got more concerned about the establishment when he left it. Is that fair?
Well, I think we all get probably a little bit prickly as we get older. But he was a plain talker from the start. Very concerned, because already he could see the storm clouds gathering again, that our world was getting more dangerous, not less. But there wasn't an appetite, there wasn't a recognition that we need to prepare for a very different world. And still, we were slimming the size of the armed forces down. He himself had to be responsible for cutting a number of fine regiments that had been around for hundreds of years, a very difficult task. Now, of course, the reason why we have an army is that insurance policy, that built-in resilience when the world does move into a difficult space. If you disband a brigade or a regiment or so forth, very difficult to then get it back. And that's what his concern was about.
Do you think he becomes an anachronism? Do you think that the British Army in 20 years' time will still be able to produce figures like him, or is he redolent of a previous age?
Oh, yes. I mean, I have faith that the army does that. You go to Sandhurst and it's a joke that they almost strip you of your personality and they start to rebuild it again. I've been back to Sandhurst not long ago, and I'm really pleased to say that in all the changes in our world, particularly the technological and so on, but also the questions about what you can or cannot say, Sandhurst remains the pillar and the introduction into the life of an army officer. And long may it continue as well. I'm just saddened, I stress, that we can't get more people from his background into politics as well.
Yeah, and maybe it's just not worth the grief to them. He was a great man. It's very striking to us. We every day we look at what's the most read on the Times, and it's a very varied set of stories. But it is striking and maybe heartening for you who were friends with Mike Jackson that the most read today in the Times is his obituary. People obviously care about him. Yeah,
perhaps we're still looking for heroes. Perhaps we're still looking for people that we can emulate, that we aspire to. I have to say, looking back, I was only in the university at the time. And the words he chose, the way he delivered them, inspired me so much. I actually signed up, indeed, for the parachute regiment. I found that they're a little bit too wacky for my liking. I ended up in the Royal Green Jackets. But nevertheless, his inspiration certainly invited me to look at the British Army. And I'm really pleased that I went into that direction.
Yeah, it's great. And people's influence like that is hard to measure. Great to speak to you, Tobias. Thank you for joining us.
Morning.
That's Tobias Elwood, former Tory MP, talking about Mike Jackson, who died at the age of 80. His obituary is the most read story on the Times app and website this morning.
It's a beautifully written obituary, isn't it? It's really, so much effort has gone into, as does happen in the Times obits. It's a particularly good example. Just on that line, he is a British general who refused to start World War III for his American counterpart in Kosovo. Sam Friedman, the political journalist, has tweeted, had Mike Jackson not refused to give this order, the captain responsible for carrying it out would have been James Blunt.
Oh my God.
Goodness me.
There's a line.
You see, the replies to that are quite funny.
I can imagine that. I do love obituaries and they obviously do take time, and they really pride themselves at the Times about that. And when there's a figure who's done stuff, it's like there aren't many anymore. But when you read the ones from the people who had just survived the Second World War, and you read what they got up to, then it's their lives are unimaginable, really, and they are beautifully told in the Times obituary. But if you do subscribe to the Times or you buy a paper today, do check it out. It's well worth your time reading to it.